Okay, I think we can get started. So I'll just very briefly say big thank you to everybody for coming back from the posters. I'm sorry to tear you away from them, but those posters are up all the time, so you can go back and visit them anytime. And then say thank you so much to all of our roundtable discussants today, including Amy, Florian, Damien, John, and Jacob. We were really excited to get this panel together. They represent an amazing diversity of humans, and for Florian, maybe not human, in terms of government, industry, academia. And so we're really happy to have you. We're excited to hear about everything you have to say. I want to further encourage all the young people in this meeting to ask as many questions as you can. You can do so either in the chat, or you can raise your hand if your video is on, or you can virtually raise your hand with Zoom. Me and Linnea will try to moderate and help make sure that everybody is heard. And with that, I'll hand it over to Kelly to show the videos. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Amy Bernard, Director of Science and Technology Strategy at the Allen Institute. And I'm going to talk a little bit about 15 years of team science at the Allen Institute in what I'm titling The Good, the Bad, and the Reality. The Allen Institute is an independent nonprofit research organization committed to tackling some of the biggest mysteries in bioscience: the structure and function of the mammalian brain, the inner workings of a human cell, and immune system complexity in health and disease. We describe our operating model as taking a team science approach to tackle big science projects that are traditionally not taken on by single investigator laboratories. So what does the team science approach look like in practice? Teams are great. Everyone loves teams. Teams evoke a sense of belonging, shared wins, collective celebration of accomplishments, or support when things don't go as planned. Working together amplifies the power of the individual, hence the adage, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. The Allen Institute adopted a team science approach early on for practical reasons. Our ambitious projects necessitated the talents of scientists, managers, and engineers for diverse disciplines. We needed to build systems that were not dependent upon the advent of a single eureka moment from a brilliant mind, but orchestrated contributions from experts across many fields. Coming together to work on specific goal-driven projects, the team science approach was a winning formula for us. We grew from a single project-centric organization that had very clear milestones and deliverables to a whole ecosystem of many people, each committed to our success, but representing unique career trajectories and skill sets. As our portfolio of work became more complex, so did our organization. It was less clear what the team really meant sometimes. While we continue to embrace the concept of team science, the practice of doing it can sometimes be confusing. Are all contributors equal in a team? What happens when an organization has many small teams versus actually comprising one big one? Do all teams need to have shared goals to be successful? Don't teams fundamentally compete or act in win-lose situations? Are there scientific endeavors where team science might be a liability, not an advantage? As an organization, we've asked ourselves these questions and do not have clear answers other than stating the reality. It's complicated. Over the last decade, the concept of team science has become almost redundant to the research landscape. Most impactful research papers have vast lists of authors and contributors, and if that's not the case, it might not accurately reflect the effort it takes to produce a body of work. It is truly difficult for an individual to perform science in a vacuum, not in some form of a team. So why does the term persist, and what are we really saying when we describe a research project as team science? Ideally, the definition of the team should mean that we embrace the aspects of the team that give it strength and acknowledge the risks and pitfalls. Sometimes an outcome of team science results in insufficient attribution if the contributions of individuals are not accurately captured. Team science can also mean that responsibility and accountability may be misplaced. These pejorative aspects of team science must be acknowledged so that the field can take advantage of the benefits of working cooperatively. Team science does take structure and management, like athletic teams, management and rules of play that the team recognizes collectively are essential. At the Allen Institute, we believe that the benefits of team science far outweigh the disadvantages, and we continue to practice team science and recognize the team is comprised of individuals, and we must recognize the needs of those individuals first for our shared success.
Hello, my name is Florian Engert, and I'm here to talk to you about the successes and obstacles of team science. And I want to make this a little bit more explicit at the example of the team we've assembled for the U19 project on neural circuits and behavior, where I think many representatives are here today. So I think that the team science and collaborations can happen at 3 different levels. The first level is where PIs and scientists just meet and talk to each other, where they share common interests, they meet and they express an interest for collaboration, but it's usually just limited to talk, a lot of talk at the level of senior scientists. The second level of team science and collaboration, I think, is when team members get together and actually write something down. This can either be a review article, a paper where they share authorship, or usually most importantly, when they apply for team project grants together in order to secure funds to do their research. In many cases, these collaborations are somewhat superficial, where the main emphasis is to get money. And once the money is secured, then the emphasis on actually working on it will get relaxed. So in my view, the third level of team science only gets reached when these team members actually get together and do research projects in true collaboration, where the sum of the parts is more than the individual parts, and where there's true synergy, and where something is achieved that couldn't be achieved at the level of the individual players. 2 things I think are necessary for this to happen. One, spatial proximity helps. When people are actually forced on to spend time with each other because they live next door to each other. And the second is that they actually need each other for their research, that they couldn't do the research with the help of the friend or colleague. In my case, for example, these are 3 people. These are Jeff Lichtman, who provides essential connectomics data for our zebrafish neuroscience research. This is Chaim Sompolinski, who provides absolutely essential theoretical framework, how we should think about it theoretically. And it's Josh Vogelstein, who provides the computational infrastructure. All of these 3 people are essential. Without them, this wouldn't be possible. So in this case, we need each other desperately. Finally, I would like to say that the true collaboration always happens and also gets initiated at the level of grad students and postdocs. If they don't work together, nothing usually happens. And what works best, if these grad students and postdocs get to know each other, usually over a beer, start talking, start getting excited, and ultimately also spend time in each other's labs for extended periods of times. I think this is something where the true magic happens, and I think that's something that should be promoted at all levels. With that, I'd like to thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you all for having me. So in my previous life, I was a basketball player. I love this picture of topological data analysis of stats in the NBA, which highlights that there are actually many more positions in the sport than the traditional 5 that we typically label. There are two-way defensive players, rim protecting, big men, etc. And the success of a team's personnel who really hit high goals are never isolated to one edge of this graph, but rather have some combination of these hidden or unofficially labeled skill sets. And I imagine that our science is flush with similar hidden or latent positions and talent, in that true accomplishment for many of our bigger goals of our work will rely on unlocking that potential. Now, there are different levels of team science, within a lab, on a specific project, between labs to expand capabilities, between institutions to coalesce resources, but also across scientific fields, because frankly, they are all interconnected, across professional disciplines to make more efficient the information transfer that support policy, education, community, etc. So the problem in our space, our training, is that our training, our institutions, our funding systems, etc., are often set up to promote what Steve Hyman would say is the cognitive boxes, where information transfer is typically at a trickle between these various boxes. So now for a plug and a little bit about my journey is my new position at the University of Minnesota as the director of the Masonic Institute of the Developing Brain is aiming to raise awareness and resources at a very high level and build more efficient systems to break down these walls across mental health, preclinical models, research informatics, policymakers, educators, and so forth. So I'm glad to be here and happy to talk about any and all of my experience along the way with regard to team science. Thank you.
I'd like to thank the organizers for this opportunity to participate in this NeuroNex Roundtable on the topic of team science. The mission of the NIH Brain Initiative is to revolutionize our understanding of the human brain by developing and applying novel technologies for probing neural circuit function in both health and disease. And in this way, I think the goals of the NIH Brain Initiative and the NSF NeuroNex dovetail really quite nicely, creating a lot of new synergies and opportunities for discovery. Now, over the last 5 years, we've seen remarkable progress, not only through NIH Brain, but also through NeuroNex and other programs around the country, if not the world. And during this time, we've seen the development of new genetic sensors and actuators, which combined with new imaging technologies, allow us to monitor and modulate neural circuits in ways that were unimaginable just 5 or 10 years ago. We've seen the advent of single cell technologies and other anatomical analysis technologies that have helped us characterize the diversity of cell types in the mammalian brain based on their molecular, physiological, and anatomical properties. And on the engineering side, we've seen the development of some pretty amazing new brain-machine interfaces, which have relied on the production and application of new electrode materials, adaptive or closed-loop systems, and very importantly, the application of new machine learning algorithms to decode and encode information that will be used not only for understanding the principles of neural processing, but also in the development of sensory motor prostheses. So these are just some highlights of some developments that have come about in the last 5+ years that have really revolutionized the way we can think about how the brain functions. And this brings me to the topic of team science and the role of team science in driving discovery. I think one thing that we need to remember is that asking the right question is always paramount, but also at the same time to realize that as we learn more and more about the complexities of how neural circuits drive behavior, the next experiment becomes even more complex, more difficult to probe, to really push the bounds of knowledge even further beyond that. And it often demands the expertise not only from biology, but also from the physical, engineering, and data sciences. There are a few good examples of that. One is the Brain Initiative Cell Census Project that is, again, relied on a lot of new technologies for assaying cells, but also the generation of large data sets, and therefore the pressing need to not only manage the data sets, but to analyze the data. NIH Brain Program has a robust circuits portfolio that's focused on unraveling circuits by combining theory and experiment, and also by pushing ourselves to find research opportunities in humans. So I think team science certainly plays a big role in leveraging and integrating diverse disciplines in the service of understanding brain function. It's going to be more and more important for us to do that, again, as the problems get more complex, but there are many challenges, and I hope we can discuss those today. We need to always bear in mind the importance of creativity, but also the need to produce data, to manage the resources, including the human resources that come out of these processes, and also to be mindful of how we're going to attribute credit to the people who did the work, especially the trainees who are really looking to move forward to the next stage of their scientific career. So with that, I will just wrap up, and again, look forward to a broader discussion with the rest of the panel.
Hi, I'm Jacob Vogelstein. I'm the managing partner and co-founder of Catalio Capital Management, a life science venture capital firm. And prior, I was a professor at Johns Hopkins and a program manager for the government at the Intelligence Advanced Research Projects activity. As someone trained in an interdisciplinary field in biomedical engineering, the concept of team neuroscience has always seemed somewhat intuitive to me. Most, if not all, sufficiently ambitious projects with meaningful impact, I think, have required multiple skill sets, and it's rare, if not impossible, for one person to have everything that is necessary for success. I was fortunate enough to start my career at a place where team science was the norm, at the Johns Hopkins University Applied Physics Laboratory, where everything that we did was team science. There really were no individual projects. And I think it was there that I learned two crucial rules for the success of team science projects. The first was the importance of having a shared mission and vision for the team, and for having someone whose job it was to not only continually champion that mission and vision, but also to evangelize it and to ensure that everyone on the team was bought into that mission and vision. In science, I think we tend to think all the sort of management cheerleading tends to be fluff, but it really is critically important on big projects, because in order to get people to work their hardest, they really need to believe in what they're doing. And when things start getting difficult, which will always happen on any project of sufficient scale, magnitude, and impact, things won't go well. And when they don't go well, people really then more than ever need to stick with it. And fundamentally, people don't stick with things that they don't believe in. So having a shared mission, having a shared vision, having community buy-in to the project and the goals is really essential for its long-term success. I think the second rule for success of a team science project that I learned was the importance of having a solid execution plan, and for having someone whose job it is to keep everything on track for that plan. Too often, I think, as scientists, we discount the management of a project and assume that anything that isn't research is just kind of unnecessary paperwork and bureaucracy. I think, however, with team projects and big initiatives, it's really essential to have someone whose full-time job it is to keep the group organized, to make sure everyone is communicating effectively, and to attend to the schedule and the budget. Because in team science, it's not really enough to have individual success by the performers. We really need to have collective success of the enterprise. So with that, I'm happy to take questions about the big team science projects I've been in, or the ones you've been in, or the ones you're thinking about, or anything else that's on your mind. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. That ends the video panels, and now we're on to the session where everyone is invited to ask questions to any of the panelists. And again, encourage the younger people to ask as many questions as you can, because turns out our future is in your hands. I can start it off. So one question I have for each of the panelists is, you've all mentioned diversity along a variety of dimensions, and I wonder, which dimension of diversity has been most important for the success of your various projects? Obviously, there's many options and there's many features, but at the end of the day, at points you may have had to make a trade-off between diversity of gender versus race versus ideas versus age versus background, and I wonder where you ended up prioritizing and why.
I'm happy to start. Okay. It's a great question. For the BRAIN Initiative, it's really, the BRAIN Initiative was driven by the pressing need to build better tools for studying how the nervous system functions. And I think at the time, this was back in 2012, 2013, when the BRAIN Initiative was being conceptualized, there was a recognition of many of the great inventions and discoveries being made outside the field of neuroscience, outside biology, namely in the physical and engineering sciences and materials, in computer science and so forth. So I think the success of the BRAIN Initiative so far has been due to a fairly effective leveraging of expertise and diversification of expertise from fields outside of biology. And as with everything, it's still a work in progress. I think the challenge and the current limitation is that diversity in other areas has been slower to come around. I think there are a lot of trainees that start out in science, starting in high school and college, that wind up not being at the table when it comes to formulating and leading some of these projects, either individual investigator initiative projects or these team science projects. So I think that's something we really need to work on. We're leaving a lot of talent on the table, and I think that is just a series of missed opportunities that we really need to find and structure ways to address. But in terms of science, I think what's propelled the RAIN initiative so far, and much of the work you'll see here today, has been the diversification of expertise, but there's a lot more to it than just that.
I can follow up on that. My personal experience, I've like I said, there's kind of two layers of this in multiple dimensions, as described actually in the question about diversity of expertise and diversity of backgrounds and cultures, and kind of personnel that are contributing to the science. I've kind of made it a mission of my lab to kind of maximize as best to my ability the latter, because and there are lots of examples of where how it improves the science and kind of the thought process about how you approach specific questions. One, like John was saying, is that not doing that definitely leaves on the table a lot of talent and kind of angles to the questions that we're trying to ask that are just missed opportunities. And two is that providing these opportunities, bringing more people to the table, can facilitate not missing those missed opportunities. And there's several examples of my work in my lab where that level of diversification absolutely improved the science, brought things to our attention that we just were never thought of. I think the genetics world right now is ripe with this, about how a lot of the genetics findings are not necessarily totally representative because of the populations, particularly for common variant type studies. So the populations that have been made to generate the baselines are not truly representative. It's not really reaching everybody. And so those, in having diverse folks in the lab, have brought kind of findings and things like that to your attention. We realize, well, the same thing is likely happening in your own data. For us, we do a lot of brain imaging, we do a lot of population studies, and it's the exact same problem. And it was only brought to your attention because you have these folks who are thinking about these things, that are at the table in the research themselves. So there are lots of other examples, but I think it's critical. We've made it kind of part of our mission to make sure that we have a lot of voices at the table when we're doing our science and making big decisions. And hope is that kind of mentality can spread to other laboratories and entities as well.
I want to make another comment as an old person about young people in this context of diversity of training. All the large projects that I've operated, the most valuable individuals were those that were able to take on cross-training or came to the project with adequate understanding in at least two disciplines, so that one could actually have within the environment where you discussed complex projects, a translator. To be very practical, we're in a very difficult situation worldwide right now, particularly in the US. A lot of graduate students and postdoctoral fellows are stalled in their current situations because of the COVID stand down, which is likely to continue. So this comment's really directed to those of you from NSF, NIH, who actually are in positions to do quick activities that would help a project or family of projects like NeuroNex3. Offer fellowships for cross-training, 1-year gap projects, 2-year gap projects, so that we can fill our projects with people who are learning something different from what they brought to the project, including an emphasis on those with diverse backgrounds of all sorts, so that we build a new community out of this crisis of cross-trained individuals to fuel team science. That's my comment.
Thanks, Mark. I wonder if any of you
I just wonder, Mark, if I could just follow up that further. Is that, I wonder if the mechanisms that are already in place for getting fellowship additions to our existing grants, for diversity, for adding a category, cross-training to get supplementals on either NIH or NSF grants in this time to do that, sort of thing.
Kristen, I'm just saying that it's an opportune time for our government representatives to try and pitch this as something to help with a crisis.
Yeah, I agree.
For example, all of our training grants, we're having trouble right now because the students have largely had to stand down for their laboratories. They're not going to make their third year advanced to candidacy in many cases. So money applied within training programs or large grants like this to offer a gap year, but to emphasize cross-training.
I agree.
I wonder if any of the other panelists have any comments about this.
NIH Brain and NIH Wide, we are helping out trainees on individual fellowships to account for this delay in productivity, and that's being done it's being done technically on a case-by-case basis, but we've been accommodating. I cannot speak for training programs per se because we do not have any T mechanisms in Brain specifically.
Amy, you were saying something in the chat. Maybe you can respond to.
Well, it wasn't specifically on this topic exactly. I think this is a good topic that's been raised, but there were other questions coming up related to attribution that I did have thoughts on, related to, the complexity of timing, training, seizing the moment, motivating people. Yeah, I think that of course there need to be some sort of centralized approaches in terms of funding, but that's actually a little bit different than the topic of team science, how you facilitate the team itself, and maybe then even what are some of the challenges to making team science effective, which is where I'm seeing some of the questions here in the chat heading in that direction. And much what was described earlier, I feel like some of that has to do with addressing sort of institutional challenges in terms of how we recognize success. Part of that is with grant funding, but part of that is also with publications. And these are bigger questions that are coming through in the chat. I don't know if we want to pivot to that in terms of the discussion panel.
Could I just say a word or two about that? Because I think it's very important. Terry pointed this out in the chat. People's tenure decisions are often based on what it is that they've done alone. And if you are someone who does cross-disciplinary work, if it looks as if what you're doing overlaps with someone more senior than you, that can create a very negative incentive. And that's one problem. The other issue is how people treat the more junior people, especially those who don't make it as first author. So again, do you split the project and try to generate enough outcomes so that 2 or 3 of the junior people get first authorship? These are the kinds of conundrums that people have to deal with. And of course, when you start to have papers that have 10, 15, or 20 people on them, number 7 and number 11 are not going to get very much credit for being on that paper, and that's going to have a negative impact. So there are some serious disincentives in the way the academy is structured and the way attributions is structured for doing major team science. And I think that's something that I'm not trying to deal with. One of the questions would be how people in high energy physics and other places like that have dealt with it historically, because it's an ongoing problem.
So if I may chime in, I mean, these are issues that we do need to face. It's going to require a culture shift, and at some level, we are our own worst enemy, or at least I used to be our own worst enemy, in that the faculty are driving a lot of this. And the faculty, we write letters for people at other institutions. We consider promotion cases within our own institutions, and some of us become deans and other of us do crazy things like join the government, right? So that's one piece. But the other piece is that having a trainee or a junior person involved in a collaboration isn't just a one-way street. One thing I learned through my own experience, for example, in the Brain Initiative Cell Census Network, is that we were among over 250 scientists involved in putting together a large collaborative study, which was just deposited in bioRxiv. And I would argue that if one approaches this right, one actually receives back more knowledge, insights, ideas, and know-how than one puts in, or one might expect to put in. And so, as with any project, you do an experiment, you ask a question, you get some answers, you learn something new, that leads to other follow-on questions and things you can do. Those things don't necessarily have to stay in the domain of the large group. So, in my own group's experience, we use this as an opportunity to develop resources that help the larger effort, but we could also use to apply for our own research and actually develop things independently. So, I think while this culture shift needs to happen, there are things we can do not to lose our trainees in the crowd. I mean, there's a lot that can be pulled out of the general goodness for individual games. The two are not necessarily mutually exclusive.
I'll just make one comment more and then let other people speak. But one of the things I often have done that has helped make for very stable, long-term, and very effective collaborations, especially as I've become more senior, is to have a frank conversation with the more junior people about their role and how attribution is going to work. So if we're starting to work on a project, I say things like, this looks like the thing that you should probably take the lead on and should be the first author on. If you want, I can even be one of the intermediate authors. I don't even need to be the senior author because there's someone slightly more junior than me whose group you're affiliated with who probably should be senior author. So if you make that an explicit basis for a conversation and you tend to be generous about it, that has two very helpful things. First of all, it tends to minimize the kind of very bad feelings that generate when people don't have those conversations and are deeply disappointed and upset when things don't go the way they like them. It also tends to stabilize the interaction because if you tend to be generous, people want to work with you and they want to continue working with you. If you tend to try to hog the credit, or if they perceive you as doing so, then they're going to just basically feel like you're trying to assimilate them and they're going to go off and do things on their own because they can't do it with you. So that's my own personal experience. Other people might have different experiences.
I'm convinced, Hillel. Anytime you want to collaborate, would you just let me know, please?
Okay, Bobby, I'll keep that very much in mind. But that's actually, it has made a huge difference having those kinds of explicit discussions right up front. And it comes up periodically, and sometimes you have to re-examine it. If it turns out that someone who you thought was only going to be doing a peripheral thing ended up playing an absolutely central role, again, you have to get the group together. It can't be done unilaterally, and sometimes that means one-on-one conversations with multiple individuals, not a group thing where there's a certain amount of peer pressure. If you do those sorts of things, things tend to work out.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just add to the comments here is that one of the difficulties I think is that it's really it's really tightly related to how you quantify success, which is so heavily weighted on money and citations and publications, and that and that's largely driven by the obviously the journals, funding bodies, and whatnot. Is like, what is the true currency of like how you kind of move forward, and like adding pieces, thinking outside the box a little bit about what are how can we quantify success that's not just those things, so that tenure, promotion, and things like that can actually promote team science. I think is probably a critical it's probably a critical thing to think about as a group, and kind of push some of these bodies which kind of control the levers a little bit onto changing.
Just a quick comment. The lever for that is money. That if you want to change the academic review process, some of you have been deans or higher, if there's money associated with interdisciplinary training and involvement in large group projects, independent of this crediting the way journals do it, then everybody will fall in line. So it's really up to government to change the way this looks to universities.
Just want to follow up on that comment, Mark, because there's only maybe 5 minutes left in this discussion, and we focused a lot on all these boundaries in academia. Realistically, most of the graduate students who are here are not going to end up in academia. They're going to end up in industry. And so I wonder if Jacob has anything to share about how these questions about, say, credit assignment, how they impact you in industry in terms of making decisions. Do you care whether someone was a first or senior author, or do you care about something else that people can maybe have an easier time fighting against the system if they're from diverse backgrounds?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't think since I left, government and academia maybe 5 years ago, I don't think I've known the position of a person in an authorship list. I don't think I've heard a single person reference that in any discussion we've ever had on any company for any hire. We definitely care about, references. And so it matters when the PI, speaks very strongly about, you know, a person or what their former employer thought of them. But, you know, the conversations are very different. I mean, people have merit in lots of different ways. There's no requirement typically for someone to have been necessarily the most important or in charge of something. Because the sort of role that they seek to play is diverse in the different enterprises that we're starting. So, you know, sure, it's going to be hard for someone who was a lab tech to have a good application to be a CEO of the next startup company. But, you know, there's a lot of very important roles in every company, and not everybody needs to be CEO. Not everybody wants to be CEO. I mean, it's not that much fun to be CEO, to be totally honest. And there's a lot of good jobs that are not CEO. So I think, in general, what matters more is the contribution along a dimension that is the kind of role that you want to play. If you're a technical contributor, you have to be a really solid technical contributor. If you're a thought leader, you have to be a really solid thought leader. But, you know, your relative position compared to your other folks in your lab and things like that, I mean, matters like zero.
I really agree with what Jacob said. I mean, that in terms of finding the area in which you're strong, you know, whether that's technical, organizational, conceptual, finding that, and then finding the appropriate recognition group within that is also key. So more and more, obviously, certainly in terms of software development, platforms like GitHub help with the attribution, where they provide a non-conventional publication sort of merit badge framework where there's verification for what people's contributions are. And taking a more holistic approach to what these contributions are is going to take more work from people in positions to evaluate the value that different people in a team-based environment are bringing to the table. But this is essential, and some of that comes naturally through recommendations because people do that organically. They pull on that data when they're more connected to it in terms of highlighting that in recommendations. It certainly doesn't come through conventional publications. So it is not coming through a publication format that we have now. I think people recognize that. So, you know, you can't rely on that. And it sounds like from what Jacob just said, he doesn't, and people in his field don't exclusively look at just what author list did you show up on in a paper, but looking at the other ways in which value is established is key and needs to be improved. There are creative ways of doing this, but there are no sort of out of the box easy ways of doing it from my perspective.
I'll just say one more thing on top of that, Amy. One of the, you know, in some sense, I think all the trends in academia, and some of the folks made comments about this earlier, of, you know, PIs recognizing that they need to let other people take credit for certain things, that they need to, you know, there's asterisks on these people contributed equally, you know, there's different kind of people more senior and people more junior kind of have an understanding of who gets what in the list. It honestly has degraded the value of the position to the point where it's kind of irrelevant. Like, I don't even know what to make of somebody being first author anymore in a list of, you know, 25, because there's 3 or 4 people that all did very important things, and the last 5 authors are all senior scientists. It just seems like it doesn't have any import anymore. Like, it doesn't mean anything, at least to me, from what I could tell.
I agree.
I would just like to add that really pushing journals, and you can just do it in your acknowledgments for that matter, to just standardly indicate what everybody did. What was their role on the publication? And you know, some journals insist that you do that, but it could become the culture, and then when you have the conversation, you know, for a job interview in industry, you can say, well, you know, tell me about what you know how to do, and based on the publications, and then GitHub for software, but based on the publications attribution, if it says you did the electrophysiology experiments and somebody else did the EM, then you wouldn't ask them questions necessarily about the technical components of how they did the EM, but you would find out, you know, what they know how to do. So I think that there's, you know, I think there has been and continues to be in industry tenure process a terrible problem with looking at authorship order as the measure of contribution. And I don't know who said it, but we, the faculty, can change that. And we have to change that. We have to go into the tenure room and look at the contributions that people are making much more broadly before we make those decisions. But it's going to be a bit of an uphill battle. And we had a huge uphill battle when we had a dean that didn't even consider all journals that, as being equal, or even as some of them not even counting because she'd never heard of them. They weren't in her field. So, it's a battle that we have to be willing to do as senior faculty when people are going and have to be rewarded for doing it, to change the culture, to change the way credit is given, or it's going to be a continued problem in academia, even if it's not a problem in industry.
I just want to jump in because something that Jacob said was absolutely critical, and it matters to me as well. The letters of recommendation are in some sense even more important. The person can have a very large CV, they can be on a lot of papers, but what you want to understand is what are the contributions that they made? What is it that they brought to the table in each of these cases? Especially if someone is making the transition from academia to industry, thinking hard about which industry you're going into. What are the kinds of skill sets that the industry is looking for, and how do you emphasize that in the letter is absolutely critical. And having had some colleagues and students who've done that, you write a different kind of letter. But each time you write a letter, you have to keep that in mind, it seems to me. And a lot of people don't make that enough of a priority based on some of the letters I've read.
So thank you for that. I hate to break up this conversation, but we are already 4 minutes late and we have 1 minute remaining of break before we start the next session, if I'm reading the clocks right. So what I would do is encourage everyone to continue these discussions, not just amongst ourselves, but more importantly, perhaps with their institutional administrators, with people who are in charge of the money, and people who are in charge of making decisions, and keep pressing them. One thing that wasn't explicitly raised by any of the speakers, I think, was the issues of brown, black, and other people of color diversity and the additional struggles that we face as a community with that. I want to thank everyone who was active in the chat who didn't say anything out loud, including Becca, Lindsay, Vicky, a number of other people, Ed. Thank everyone of the panelists for sharing your opinions. I'm sorry we didn't have much longer to speak, but we can all keep talking throughout the conference, and invite everyone to take a 1 minute break now and then come back for the next session. Thank you.